They were made in the image of God. Now, in one sense, human beings are creatures, and thus they have in common the attributes of other creatures. We know this today from genetics. What percentage of my genes are shared with a chimp or a piglet? And when the piglet dies and returns to the dust, he does exactly what I do. I return to the dust too. We're part of this created order. And if you keep stressing the continuity and keep stressing the continuity, then eventually you might come out with a kind of position that Peter Singer adopts at Princeton University, who wants, in effect, all animal life to have, so far as it's possible to work out at all, exactly the kind of rights that human beings have. Because after all, we're genetically the same stuff. We are physical beings, they're physical beings. They live, they're born, they are born, they die. So also is our course. Genesis doesn't see things quite that way. It insists that human beings, and human beings alone, are made in the image of God. Now, as you can imagine, that expression, image of God, has, over the millennia, generated endless discussion. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? And so philosophers and theologians have written long tomes saying, well, it has something to do with the facility of language, or it has something to do with our self-identity, of our reasoning processes, of love that might be altruistic, of our capacity to know God, and so on, and so on, and so on. But if you were picking up this book for the first time and read it and didn't know anything about all of these debates, I suspect that your approach to this image of God language would be a little simpler. It becomes a kind of master concept which is filled in as you go along. That is, we reflect God, and the ways in which we reflect God will get filled in as the Bible unfolds. So from this first chapter, God is a talking God. He speaks to human beings and they speak back to him. There is a commonality of speech, of propositions, of knowledge that is not merely felt, but that can be articulated. There is also something of creativity. Of course, our creativity is not like God's, but God makes things. He makes things out of nothing. We don't do that. But there is implanted in human beings as a reflection of God, because we are made in his image, a certain creativity. We work with our hands. My wife does spectacular needlepoint and silken metal thread and quilts and things like that. My daughter does the cooking. My wife does this sort of thing. I like working with my hands in wood. Some write. Some are remarkably creative in their physicality. I have a son who just looks at every new physical challenge that comes along and plunges in. And he is almost an artist as he learns scuba diving or spelunking in a cave or whatever the new challenge is. He's in it, and he's almost artistic in his creative ability to explore some new challenge. Where does that come from? By and large, that's not characteristic of elephants, black widow spiders, rocks. And then there is the capacity to work. God is said to work all of this creation week and then come to the end of it. And what he gives to the man and the woman are certain responsibilities to work in this world, to tend the garden, which is teased out across all of Scripture as something honorable. Christians should never descend to the place where working at the manufacturing floor or working as a secretary Or working driving a bus or doing research chemistry, that's secular. I do that to pay the bills. And then I'm supposed to be spiritual on Sunday. But what I do on Sunday in spirituality, that's just for Sunday. Then Monday I go back to my reagents as I try to develop a new chemical that will fight cancer. Rather, if it's God's universe and we are made in His image, then as we work, our work too reflects Him and is offered back up to Him with integrity and gratitude. It is significant because we are made in the image of God. It changes our perspective about who we are. And then, although we have to recognize that there are differences between God and us, there are other things where we are similar, where we reflect Him. Later on in the Bible, God will say things like, "Be holy, for I am holy." So proper image bearing ought to reflect God's holiness. We'll come to what holiness is a little later on. God never says, "Be omnipotent, for I am omnipotent." That is, be all-powerful and do anything that you choose to do because I am all-powerful. There are some differences between the God who is the creator and we who are creatures. There are some differences. We're not God. We're His image bearers. We're made in His image. And we reflect Him in certain ways. God, in the Bible, is not only the creator, He's finally the sovereign over all. But the fact that He puts these human beings, this man and this woman, in charge over the rest of the created order, not to rape it, not merely to exploit it, not to become ecologically selfish, but to be God's own stewards over the good world that God has made, really makes us, I don't know what else to call it, vice regents. We're made in His image, and as God has made it all, and we're under Him and charged with the responsibility of looking after it, we're reflecting something of God. Even the capacity to know God, to delight in Him, is wonderful. There's a book by Peter Williams called "I Wish I Could Believe in Meaning," a response to nihilism. That is, a response to the view that we've merely emerged from the primordial muck. Where is the meaning in this? From the Bible's point of view, meaning in life is bound up with the fact that we were made by God and for God, in His image, with an eternal destiny. It changes our perception of what human beings are. Otherwise, we slink into what one philosopher has called self-referential incoherence. What he means by this is we compare ourselves with ourselves. We have no external standard by which anything should be judged. And we cannot find an anchor for our being anywhere. And we then drown ourselves in temporary pleasures or pursuit of money or self-promotion, but there is no anchoring that locates us and gives us a meaning beyond ourselves. There's no scale. Human beings were made in the image of God. And in this connection, they were made to work, to rule, to serve as God's stewards, to be surpassingly God-centered.